Let's talk about the topography of your farm. Topography just means like the land. So, a big problem in farms is that the topsoil, which we know takes a long time to form, unless you're composting, it can be taken away. If it rains a lot, if you're watering the farm, if there's wind, you can lose that topsoil. And that topsoil has all the delicious nutrients in it that it's going to help your plants grow and help your beneficial bacteria, fungus, and beneficial bugs and animals come back so that you can have a beautiful, healthy ecosystem that not only grows food but protects the food that you grow. So, soil erosion is the movement of soil components from one place to another. Remember, roots can help anchor the topsoil, but when you harvest your crops, you take your crops out of the ground, those roots are dying. And so it can erode, right? So, how can we stop this? How can we do soil conservation? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of different uh, solutions. Something called terracing, contour planting, windbreaks, and conservation tillage. Let's say you have a farm that's slightly hilly, right? You can do contour planting. As rain falls down your hilly farm, it will bring the soil with it. So, what you're going to want to do is grow your crops perpendicular, not up and down the hill, not with the slope. You want to make them perpendicular. That way, when it rains and it runs down the hill, it's going to hit all of these lines of crops, and that's going to stop the soil from all running down to the bottom of the hill. Prevent soil erosion. It's called contour planting. Now, windbreaks, let's say you have a lot of wind on your farm. They also call it shelter belts. Why don't you just grow some bigger plants like trees and stop that wind? Now, this does take a little bit of time, so you have to plan this out before you have your farm, right? Or maybe when you're making your farm, if there's a forest and you're going to deforest the forest, cut down all the trees, don't cut all the trees down. Leave lines of trees so that when the wind blows, it gets blocked. That way it doesn't blow your soil away. It's very simple, right? You can also grow these in your farm. You can grow really tall plants next to shorter plants, next to taller plants and shorter plants. You can make what are called windbreaks. Now, if you have a really steep farm, you want to do something called terracing. Now, that's when your farm is really, really steep, like on a mountain. And if you know when it rains on that mountain, all that soil is going to run right down to the bottom of that mountain. So, what they do is you build these little walls. Usually they're made of mud. When I was in Indonesia, I actually saw terracing just like this everywhere. You build little walls and you make a flat spot on the hill. This is not natural. This is, people did this. This probably took a long time to do. As you can see how big they are. But when it rains on this mountain, it doesn't rain and fall down the slope because there are no slopes. It hits these flat sections, these terraces, and sinks into the soil and does not move the soil, doesn't erode it. Now, those are for very specific types of farms, right? You don't want to terrace a flat farm. You wouldn't do windbreaks somewhere where it's not windy, right? But something called conservation tillage. Tilling is when you run either machines or pitchforks or any different device that kind of after the plants are harvested and you have no plants on your farm, you kind of churn up and dig up and mess with the soil to make it softer and have more air in it so that when you put seeds in it, they can grow a lot faster. Now, obviously, when you do that, you're loosening the soil. If it's windy or if it rains, it can erode. So, what conservation tillage is means that after you harvest your crops, right? Like this is what it looks like after you harvest corn, monoculture on an industrial farm. Then what they do is they have a machine that comes through and kind of chumps up the soil, makes it look like this. But this, if you just leave all this stuff, it prevents wind from blowing your soil away. If it rains, this stuff soaks up a lot of that water and you won't lose your topsoil as much. So this is another way to prevent soil erosion on top of the other stuff we talked about. That's about pests. Let me think if there's anything else. There was something else I wanted to talk about for your soil. Oh, how are you going to nutrify your soil? You can talk to me about how you're going to compost. There's different ways to compost. Excuse me, you can look them up and talk about those things. But that is some ways that you can conserve the soil, prevent it from eroding.